Hi, my name is Chris. Welcome to The Ancient Oak, where we are discussing the journey from Christianity into Wicca, or paganism, or British traditional witchcraft, whichever one you want to call it. I'm having a little bit of a cold right now, so if I sound a little stuffed up, I apologize, but need to knock the videos out. Must press on no matter what. So, in the last video, we left off in Walking Away from Christianity Part 2, left off talking about my initial introduction into Wicca through reading Scott Cunningham's book on the solitary practitioner. So one thing I wanted to talk about, sort of to dive into a little bit more as a sort of a brief aside before we go into some other topics, is one of the things that I think would strike any person coming into Wicca from Christianity is the departure from monotheism into a polytheistic worldview. I would say that what I've come to discover after getting involved with Wicca is that what I thought would be a very hard jump from monotheism into polytheism wasn't that hard at all, and I'd like to explain why. I'll back up though and kind of tell you how it first struck me. So when I was first reading Scott Cunningham's book, it's a basic book on the tenets of Wicca. It's not a deep dive into any real historical work or anything, but it's a great book. But he gives an introduction to the basic tenet of Wicca, which is that there is a god and a goddess. Now, again, people take that to mean very different things. Some people would say that the god and the goddess are two very specific, unique gods. Some would say that maybe different feminine gods throughout ancient times have all been representations of the divine feminine, and likewise for the divine masculine. So that's kind of where I lie on it. I think upon reading my that first introduction with Scott Cunningham, and he's talking about the god and the goddess, I will say, like, the Christian in me sort of, my ears perked up a little bit. My suspicion went up, and I said, well, but there's only one God, so I don't know if I'm going to be able to get on board with this. But the more I really thought about it and walked with that idea and started my own personal practice at home as a solitary practitioner, it sort of just kind of came to me naturally, especially being out in nature and sort of just really observing the natural world. It's really not any more complicated than that. There's always exceptions to rules, and I'm not saying there isn't, but by and large, the world is bifurcated into masculine and feminine. And that's not to say that everyone who's a man is masculine and vice versa, but at least as a overarching idea, we can say that that's generally true. And so I really found that to resonate with me, because I was at a point where all I was doing is just being thankful for the sun coming up in the morning at that point, after leaving Christianity and not having anything to believe in. So the idea of there being a divine masculine and a divine feminine was another sort of like an easy jump for me, because it was really not so much acknowledging maybe two different gods or venerating gods or anything, but it was just an acknowledgement that that's the circle of life in the world. To put it very simply, that's the building block of life. And so it really spoke to a really, really obvious just thing about looking at the way the world works is it's a duality. It's almost Taoist in a way. The sun and its association with the god and the masculine, the moon and its association with the goddess. So you have this cycle of light and dark and different seasons being associated with either the masculine or feminine traits. So the idea of a divine masculine and a divine feminine really spoke to me, because it just sort of highlighted what I was seeing just in the world, the duality of men and women and life and death and the sun and the moon and the cycles of the seasons, and it all fits into this category of the god and the goddess, and it's really a beautiful system. It's doesn't demand anything of you in terms of a belief. It's just a way to frame the world around you, and a way to honor and respect the world around you, and a way to look at the earth, and a way to look at nature. And it's a very beautiful system. So personally, coming from the Catholic Church, I might have found it actually easier to make this transition. I can't speak to the Protestants out there and what they would say, but at least from a Catholic or an Eastern Orthodox perspective, it was easier to accept the idea of there being multiple gods. And the reason for this is something that is a very common criticism that Protestants lay at the feet of the Catholic and the Orthodox. They say that our veneration, or the veneration that we had, or that I had, of the Virgin Mary or the saints, is nearly identical to idolatry or polytheism, because I would have prayed to the saints, and I had what I thought was a deep relationship with the saints. And I don't know what I think about that anymore, because I did feel a closeness to them, so I don't know where to categorize that at this point, but that's another conversation. But I had always had statues or images of the Virgin Mary around my home, and so I guess I always, in a unconscious way, I always already had associated femininity with the divine and with God and with God's plan of salvation. As an Orthodox Christian, we don't go as far as the Catholics do in saying things like Mary is the mediatrix of all grace, is what the Catholics would say. The Orthodox don't go that far, but they go damn near as far in saying that she's central in the role of salvation. They would say that her saying yes to the Holy Spirit, because she could have not said yes, is what they would say. So she was the first person to encounter Christ, and so she's so important in those traditions. And obviously, anyone who's even took a quick glance at the Orthodox or Catholic Church, they know that Mary and veneration to Mary is a huge part of that faith. And so accepting in ideas like the divine feminine or the goddess was not that hard, because I had already had a place in my heart for the divine feminine. So I would say maybe for anyone out there that's coming into this sort of practice from a more traditional Christian approach, even the traditional Anglicans have a reverence for Mary, not as much as the Catholics and the Orthodox, but so anyone really in a traditional Christian background, I would say you might be surprised how easy it is to sort of open your mind up to those different ideas. So some people might say this is somewhat of a, I don't want to call it a cop-out, but some people might see it as, I would say, I guess I'm kind of speaking for people who are very dedicated Catholic and Orthodox people who I know, and I can speak for myself because I was that person. I would have said to someone like me that it's the easy way out to not have a firm belief in a God, to leave your mind and heart completely open to everything. I would say, would have said then, can be spiritually dangerous. But the beautiful thing about what my brief interaction with atheism and learning about the really good and solid arguments against, well, really any religion, in terms of at least proving it. Obviously, I'm very invested in religious ideas, and I love it. I'm not saying I'm an atheist, but my introduction to those thinkers did make me obviously question very heavily my Christian beliefs. So I guess it was also easier after I had become willing to take one monotheistic religion out of the box of my mind and say, well, maybe if I don't know if there's any God or if there's one God, then hell, for all I know, there's millions of gods. So my advice to anybody coming out of Christianity, looking into Wicca or paganism, is always just to spend time in nature. And I think a lot of the answers that you're looking for might just come from simply being outside and observing the natural world and animals and the interaction, and being out at night and being out in the morning and just watching the changing of the seasons, and really starting to think about, I like to think about putting myself back in the place of, a peasant farmer living in 1000 BC somewhere, and just being at the whim of nature and in awe of the changing of the seasons and the eclipses and the comets, and just thinking about what you would make of that. And I know it's easy to say, well, now we know what all those are. There are scientific explanations for this. And that's true, but there's still also spiritual elements to all of these things, if you want to believe that. And I do. So I would recommend just getting out into nature and start trying to find things that you can associate with the divine feminine and the divine masculine. And I think that will start to help you conceptualize the notion of a god and a goddess. And some really basic things that you can do are things like I mentioned, getting up and watching the sunrise, or also developing your own personal rituals to do on new moons or full moons, and considering the nature of the divine feminine in the moon and the nighttime and what that means. For me, when I think about it, I think of night as going to sleep and sort of a comforting time, and that's just my personal relation with the idea of the goddess and night. And when I think about the daytime, I think about the sun, and I think about movement, motivation, getting up to be productive, and early man getting up and harvesting and hunting. And so again, this is just my personal interpretations. These are not by any stretch like teachings officially of Wicca. I'm just giving you my perspective on how I've conceptualized this idea of a divine masculine and feminine. And if you're struggling with that, just sort of look for things that you can associate with either or, and maybe that'll help you start understanding what Wicca is trying to say when they talk about a god and a goddess. I think we'll leave it at that for today. Thank you for watching, and I will see you at the next video.